Everybody, welcome back to the Inspire Health podcast and to our series as we continue on with science, mysticism, and beyond, humanity's next phase of evolution. Today's guest is Magenta Pixie. Magenta has been in communication with a collective group of light beings or a higher self aspect since 1993. She affectionately refers to these beings as the White Wing Collective Consciousness of Nine, or simply the Nine. Regular meditation and a journey of synchronicity within her own life led to this awakening and connection. Magenta releases her messages from the Nine in video form on YouTube. Since releasing her first message in 2008, she has attracted over 75,000 subscribers, which I think is actually well over that right at the moment. She has worked individually with clients all over the world and is the author of a number of books: Masters of the Matrix, Divine Architecture and the Starseed Template, The Infinite Helix and the Emerald Flame, The Black Box Program, and The Rose Gold Flame as Antidote, and Lessons from the Living Lemuria, channeled books teaching individuals, particularly starseeds and light workers, to find their own sovereignty through the understanding of their own energy systems. Her passion is helping people to move through trauma, embrace the enlightenment and ascension path, and to find their own connection with creativity, divinity, and joy. Magenta, what an honor to have you as a guest for us in our show today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really pleased to be here, and it was lovely to hear you read that out, actually, because it was a while since I wrote that, and it's really nice to hear it back, and you read that so well, and I'm thinking to myself, wow, is that me?
I totally feel the same way with bios. It's actually really fun listening to your own bio. I know even what I've done, like if I'm teaching a course somewhere, or if I'm lecturing somewhere, and then someone reads my bio, I'm like, that sounds so good. I'm like, it's kind of like I don't totally connect with that in the same way. But this is actually this is the book that I've been reading the last while, and we'll get into some of the information around this book earlier on. But check out Magenta's books; they're amazing. And this is actually from a book that talks about diet, and particularly the route that this goes. I loved it, Magenta, and that's coming from a background where it's like I work a lot with diet with people, and that as I'm reading it, I was literally reading it and thinking, well, what about this? I turn the page and you ask the exact same question. They're like, okay, well, what about this? I turn the page, you ask the exact same question. So it is really dialed in, and it actually, the way that it resonates makes the most sense to me. So we'll go through that one in a little bit.
Oh, that's really lovely to hear, especially from somebody who works in that profession. You know, that's lovely to hear, so thank you.
Yeah, we'll get into some of that, because I think it's some really interesting stuff on that. But why don't we start off, for people that aren't totally familiar with your work, can you tell us a little bit about the Nine and how you came into connection with them, and even the whole process, I think, of even channeling? Like, I would say like a decade ago, this was, weird stuff for people, for a lot of people that weren't aware of it. And I feel like now it is becoming like, as I think things are changing, I think people are connecting more and more to this, and we're opening up to this divine sort of guidance in a lot of ways. But I'd love to hear from your perspective, how did you connect with the Nine, and what's that process like? How does channeling work?
Well, for those people who've got a spiritual leaning, I would say go with the word channeling. But if you don't, if you're more sort of scientific and you think all of this is a bit woo-woo and without any grounding, then forget the word channeling. There's other ways of explaining it. I took some notes because obviously I didn't want to go deeply into something. I have talked about how this all happened before, so I'll be as brief as I possibly can. But after many different things occurred in my life, and signs and synchronicity, I deliberately went into meditation with the express intention to meet what at the time I believed to be a spirit guide. So this is going back to 1993. I believed everybody had a spirit guide or a guardian angel, and that they could meet them and talk to them. That's true, but obviously it's so much more than that. So I went into meditation specifically to do that. And I read a book which gave you a series of meditations that you would follow to meet your spirit guide. And I went into the practice with extreme diligence and dedication. And obviously after much practice, it worked. And I met this spirit guide and started to communicate with this being. I'd have to go into meditation, find him, because he was presenting at the time as a male, entity, a Zulu warrior, actually, like a Zulu warrior with all of the tribal presentation. And we would sit and talk. And then I would come out of meditation. At the time, I was living with my brother, and he had studied all sorts of different forms of spirituality. Unbeknownst to me, I was completely green and naive to all this. I didn't have a clue about any of it, but he did. So I would tell my brother, this is what's happening to me. And so he knew all of the stuff, but it wasn't happening to him in the way it was happening to me. It did eventually as well with him, but in a different way. So I would come out of meditation and tell him what this being, white spirit, had told me. And he would then ask questions. I would then remember the questions, go into meditation, get into that relaxed space, get into the zone, find white spirit, try and remember all the questions my brother had asked me, get all the answers, come out of meditation, tell my brother. And this is how it went on. And then one particular day, my brother was asking me a bunch of questions, and I was trying to remember them all because they were quite deep about physics and the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, which I'd never heard of at the time. And I'm trying to remember and get all these new concepts into my head. And while I was doing that, all of a sudden, white spirit was there with me while I was awake. And I wasn't in meditation. Well, that freaked me out. And I said, oh my goodness, he's here. My brother's like, what do you mean? I said, he's here. He's like right next to me. I can feel him. I can see him. And my brother couldn't believe it, you know, and he said, you're doing what mediums do. And I said, I can't believe it. So it was all very organic and surprising. Even though I made an intention to go into this, I was green and naive. So looking at notes to actually talk to perhaps people who aren't into channeling and speaking to spirit guides, when it comes to channeling, whilst you can perceive this as a being outside of you, a spirit guide that lives in some other realm that has all the answers to these questions that you ask, what's actually true, as I've learned over the years through this communication, is this is simply another part of you. It's like being in hypnosis and accessing the subconscious mind or the superconscious mind. And what these beings are now more than one. It's evolved over the years. There are now 9 beings that are with me, and I've even gone beyond that form and speak to pure energy that doesn't even have a body. But what they say to me is, I receive through communication like energy or frequency. It's just like a frequency, like a wave form of intelligence. And when it comes to me, I interpret this through my own physical senses. I interpret this as words, as feelings, as images. That's where you get your clairaudience, your clairsentience, and your clairvoyance. But it's all the same thing. It's just the way the human body is interpreting this frequency. It's actually energy transference. And so that's really what's happening. And what you're doing is, when you're asleep, your subconscious mind comes to the fore while your conscious mind steps back, if you will, because you're dreaming. And when you're awake, your conscious mind is at the fore and your subconscious mind is in the background working away because you are awake. Now, when you're asleep, if the subconscious mind and the conscious mind are working together, both aware equally, you'll have a lucid dream. You'll be awake in the dream. But that can also be done in the waking state. And that is what is channeling. It's simply the balance of the subconscious and conscious mind working together. So it's like you are asleep and awake at the same time, or you are in deep hypnosis or completely awake at the same time. And I know this because my father was a hypnotist. He took me into hypnosis at the age of 11. So really everything that's happening in my brain when I go into meditation at the age of, what was I, sort of early 30s, all this had actually happened to me previously since I was a child. It's the same movement in the brain. It's the same brain patterning. And I remember speaking to my father and telling him what was happening to me. And he was saying, but what is happening? You're saying they're a spirit guide. What is a spirit guide? What do you mean? What's happening to you? What are you doing? This is my father. This is what he was like, you know, bombarding me with all these questions. And I'm like, I don't know the answer. So they came through and said, She is in what you would know as somnambulistic hypnosis. She is a somnambulist and she's in somnambulism. My father said that's impossible. And they said, it's the brain waves. You don't have to go into a trance to get to somnambulism. Some people can do it while they're awake. That's what it is. So I hope that helps people who are not on the channeling vibe, but would understand hypnosis.
That was beautiful.
That was great. That was actually, that was one of the best ways I think I've ever heard that described. So, and the thing is like, even when people question some of that stuff, it's like, you know, if you stretch out even into quantum physics, you know, we know there is a collective consciousness. I mean, that's pretty well aware now. We know that we have access to these Akashic records. So it's like, to me, when you're talking about just connecting even with different aspects of yourself, whatever, there's a whole lot more information to be available if we can connect to the right frequency to be able to bring it in.
That's it. It's the Akashic Records as well. That's what it is. And that subconscious mind, the nine have explained this to me as having layers, and it's about our own memory, our memory in this life, as in the conscious memory. And then you've got the memory of everything that's ever happened to you in this life on the periphery, as in if you're downstairs watching television and someone else is playing a different television in another room and you can hear it, even though you're not taking it in at all, that comes in as your memory. Then there's memory that goes beyond everything you've ever known in this life to, if you will, other lives. And that's a whole other subject, but other, it's like the aspect of the subconscious mind has a wider periphery than you are aware of. And that goes into eventually the Akashic Records, which is everything that's ever happened since the beginning of time, everything that's happening now, and everything that will ever happen to the end of time. And of course, that's all one thing. It's all one space. There's no beginning or end. That's the Akashic Records. And it's simply the memory of all and everything. It's the memory of God, if you will, or source, or you don't have to be religious. You can be an atheist to understand all this. You can be deeply religious to understand all this. It's not about that. It's scientific as well, because as you say, we have this collective consciousness. So that's really what this is. It's accessing your own memory, and our brain has to perceive it in different ways. If you're a deeply scientific, mathematical person who understands physics, you're going to get this information in numbers and in codes and shapes that you will understand. But I'm not like that. I'm pretty useless with numbers and codes and physics and geometry, which is quite ironic, really. I'm far more sort of artistic in my thinking. So everything comes through in a more sort of airy, fairy kind of way. And what the nine say to that is, she interprets left-brained concepts through the right-brained pathway. That's what they say.
Mm-hmm. That makes so much sense too. I know even like when Téa and I connect with different information, we connect with it in very different ways, even though a lot of times the underlying message, we're actually speaking the same language, but it sounds a little bit different, but the underlying message is always the same.
Yeah.
In order to help people even open up to connect to this type of information more, what would be some of the best, not really techniques, but sort of guidance that they could have for that? I mean, you mentioned meditation, so specifically for people that are wanting to connect more to this sort of other aspect of information, what are some ways that they can do that?
Or can we? Are we all psychics? If we have the natural inclination and the yearning and the desire to be open to channeling, do we all have access to that or not?
Oh, that's a great question. Every single person can do this, but many, many people shut this off. They shut off the ability to be able to do this. And it's also similar to talents and skills. So let's say, for example, drama. You've got two children in a drama class. You give them both a script, and they're both going to read the same script. You've got one child that stands up that can barely read the words, let alone bring out any kind of characterization. Then the next child, the same age, reads it perfectly, is in character, and projects to the audience. Then you have a natural actor, if you will. It's the same with everything. It's the same sort of thing with being psychic and making that connection. We're each born with different skills within our DNA sequencing, and we each have talents. So yes, everyone can do this, but some people are more adept at it, if you will, than others, because they've come in to do that. Everything that they want to do in this life, they planned before they were born. So sorry, what was your question?
And then how can they start to work with that and build that muscle a little bit?
Exactly, and that's exactly what it is. It is building a muscle, and practice is absolutely crucial. So meditation is wonderful. And meditation, you can do guided meditations, you can do meditation for health and wellness and for relaxation. This type of meditation would be to externalize one's own self, like in a dream, and present a dream character to you. And you do this through imagination. Again, you'd need to have a vivid imagination, like a child playing a game. And if it's not working for real, then you imagine it and you pretend that you're talking to a being. It can be a giant rabbit, it can be a fairy, it doesn't matter. But what's really important is to let go of any preconceived ideas, because many people will go into meditation to try to channel and make a connection. And when it doesn't happen, they think they're useless, they think they failed, they're no good, they've got tons of blocks. And they're not doing it the right way because it's happening in one way. And then they listen to someone like me speak or someone else and think, well, I can't do it like her. There's no right way to do it. It's completely unique. It's completely subjective. And everyone has their own unique way of doing this and their own skills within this. So you just relax, have no expectations at all, and go in and play. And actually don't mind whether it works or not. And if you come out of meditation and you've been meditating to do this for 6 months, still don't mind. Just think, it's okay, it hasn't happened, fine. If you start thinking to yourself, why hasn't this worked? After 6 months, I'm so useless, you are blocking yourself from it happening. You have to just chill and relax and be fine with whatever happens. Then if you can get in that space, you will start to make these connections. But meditation is only one pathway in. For many people, it just happens naturally. You know, I'd have people come to me saying, what's happening to me? This is happening and that's happening and I'm seeing this and I'm seeing that. And they just opened up naturally. Food can do it. If you go on a raw food diet or a high nutrient diet, that can trigger it. Certain herbs can trigger it. Yoga can trigger it. There are many, many things. And again, that's unique to each individual person. For example, crystals. Some people can be triggered into channeling from crystals. Other people, try as they might with every single method, it just doesn't seem to work because their skill set is somewhere else. So there are multiple ways of doing this. Number one is understanding that it's unique, relaxing, trying all these different things without any expectations. But yeah, meditation is a really good pathway in.
Wonderful. And really, that's such good advice for like everything. Approach things without strong attachments and be open to how it's going to show up.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. I think let's get into a few different things. So we've got loads of stuff to talk to you about, Magenta, and we thought, why don't we start off with maybe give us a bit of a recap of 2020 as far as, you know, there's this whole Vision 2020 and what's this all about? I mean, big picture, what's kind of gone on and why particularly now? Why now did everything really start to hit?
Yeah, I mean, 2020, you hear 2020 vision. There are clues in everything. Everything is all connected. So 2020 vision is all about clarity, all about seeing the truth. So that's a huge kind of stamp or label on 2020, if you will. But really, this is about making a choice. It's about choosing where you're polarizing as a frequency yourself. So just like the universe is frequency, just like the beings you're communicating with are frequency, so are you. and you can choose your frequency. You chose this before you were born, so you've already chosen the frequency you want to polarize as, but then when you come into this reality as a human, you then walk the path and make the choice from the physical perspective, from the human perspective, and you get all sorts of synchronicities and guidance right from when you're born to lead you into making the choice that you already made before you were born. And that choice is between, well, it's quite complex, but to simplify it, it's a choice between two things, really. Polarizing as a negative frequency being, or polarizing as a positive frequency being. There is neutral as well, but that is going off track, and it's a different model. So looking at the model of just positive and negative, you would have negative, which is a service to self frequency, and you have positive, which is a service to others frequency. So service to self, you're looking at selfishness, control, your own agenda, furthering your own reality at the expense of others and using others to get where you want to go, if you will. And service to others is about giving to others. In many ways, you can put others before yourself. That isn't really service to others, though. Service to others is self and other as one. It's about unity. So it's about compassion. And you make a choice. That's all part of your spiritual journey. This has been the case since the beginning of time, but individuals have made these choices individually or in small groups amongst a reality that's incarnated as humanity that aren't doing that yet. They haven't got to the stage where they're ready to make a choice. So many people have made these choices and gone into these polarizations since the beginning of time, but they've done this on their own. But now we are coming to a point which is called planetary completion. It's like one stage of experience comes to an end and a new stage of experience begins. You'll know this as a dimensional shift. People talk about the third dimension and moving into the fifth dimension, or the third density swapping to the fourth density. It's all the same thing. It's a new octave of experience. And what's happening is people are polarizing all at the same time now. So if you've been working on this for several years, you'll have a head start because you'll already have worked with this polarization and made your choice. 2020 is the point where the planet does it. So 2012 was like a trigger for this. The winter solstice 2012, or the solstice, depending on where you live, was a trigger for this. But the experience of that was very subjective and kind of higher dimensional. It wasn't necessarily anchored into the physical reality. But because of the amount of people that made the choice, that creates a match. Every choice you make creates a match in your reality. So the amount of people that made that choice in 2012 created the actual experience of that choice a few years later. So we're coming into now 2020, and this is the year where the actual reality shows you the choices that you can make. So the reality presents the negative world, if you will, and how to get there through making the negative choice, and the positive world and how to get there through making a positive choice. But this presentation is there for everyone. So as I said, if you've been working with this for several years, you'll have a head start. You'll know exactly what you're looking at and what you have to do. You'll understand what's happening in 2020 and why all these things are occurring. But for those who are not aware and haven't woken up before now and haven't done any practice this way, then this world to them will look like it's breaking down. It will look as though the world is crashing, the world is being destroyed. It will look like pure confusion, but actually it's very organized. And the only chaos that is within the reality has been deliberately created. The actual organic structure is very organized, but every single person is now being faced with a negative reality and a positive reality, like a bifurcation, a split of worlds, so that they can make a choice as to where they want to go. The reason why that bifurcation has occurred is because individuals made their choice, and because those individuals were cohesive in their thought structure, they then created this to happen organically. It is a complete merge between the environment, the planet, the cosmos, the galaxy, the universe, the celestial energies, and the human being. So it's like, does the human choose the reality? Does the human create the reality through their own thoughts? Or does the reality present itself, and that is what triggers the human thoughts? And the answer to that is they both happen at the same time. It's a complete unification between the self that you experience inside your body and the self that you are outside of your body, the externalized self, because all of that is you. From the higher perspective, there's only one soul, there's only one being, and there's the internal perspective and the external perspective, but they're both self and they both work together. And this is really coming into clarity in 2020. This is the year that all of this is presented on the physical level, so that the whole of humanity can see it, that each person is perceiving it in very, very different ways.
That was beautifully said, Magenta. I got chills so many times as you were saying all of that. Thank you. Beautifully explained.
Oh, thank you. So it's not easy to explain such metaphysical and esoteric concepts. So
you did it.
Yeah, I think my one of my pathways is to be able to try to explain these very esoteric concepts in clear ways. That's one of my roles here.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons why we wanted to talk to you so much, because you do such a nice way of bridging this information. For people then, because what they're going to be experiencing then, and this is what I'm noticing, and it kind of goes with what you said, but there's groups of people that are absolutely terrified, you know, and they really are terrified and they're not too sure what to do. And they're just waiting for, feels like the world's going to end. And then they follow everything to a T because that's sort of what they're being told to do. And they're just in a very strong fear state.
They're following authority.
And then you've got lots of people that I think feel like something just feels weird, but they don't really know what to do, or they're scared to do something or change. And then you've got the people that are on the verge of, like, I think even like excited about what's going on because they see the potential of what's potentially unraveling. So for the people that are kind of in those first two places, because I think the people that are excited, I feel like they know what they're doing. They know where they're going. They get the gist of it. They know where they need to focus on. For the people that are in those places where they really are stuck in fear, and I mean, even when you do know where you're going, it can be pretty easy if you start to direct your focus in certain places that you can get swamped again by what is taking place on the external world. It's kind of like there's these different realities almost. So what can people do when they are really captured up in that fear? Like, what's a good way for them to start to work with it? Because I think ultimately, collectively, the more that there's that clinging to the worry and the fear and all of the sort of quote unquote negative kind of stuff that's happening, in some ways, like, that's going to draw more energy towards that. Is that right? Am I thinking along those right?
Yes, it does. Although you can look at a negative reality, but if you are aware of what you're doing and you're cohesive within your own understanding of a higher reality, then you wouldn't actually give any focus or any energy to that reality. But if you are chaotic and not in a cohesive state, then your thoughts are all over the place. And if you're focusing on the negative only without having the cohesion and the understanding of the higher reality, then yes, you can absolutely give your energy and your focus into the creation of the negative reality, which is a kind of a deliberate act against humanity from those who want to create a negative reality. As I was saying, people make a choice before they're born whether they polarize negative or positive. The majority of the individuals on planet Earth choose to polarize positive, but there are a small group of individuals who choose the negative path. And from the spiritual point of view, they have the right to make that choice. But in order to be able to polarize as the negative, then they have to generate fear, if you will, because that's the negative vibration, as in love is the positive vibration. So they generate fear in others and take energy from other people. So those people that are afraid, some of them may actually be lending their energy to that negative vibration, but not all, because it depends on how that fear is manifesting and what it's doing to them and how they're dealing with it and how they're integrating it. And when you talk about people who are afraid, that spreads across a whole bunch of different states of awareness. So you have people in fear who have no understanding of this whole evolutionary state that we're going through, that many call ascension. That's a word that the Nine use. But you also have another group of people who are aware of this evolutionary stage. They are aware of ascension, but they're also in fear. Their fear will be dealt with differently because of their higher awareness. So for the people who have no awareness of what's happening, it's unlikely they'd find this podcast anyway. Having said that, every single individual has, if you will, guidance around them. And that is the natural frequency that's guiding them towards their positive polarization. Some may call that a guardian angel, a spirit guide, synchronicity, magic, destiny, but it's actually the frequency that they hold as an individual, that they're giving out into the reality and creating their reality. To the people who are not aware of this, who are in fear, that frequency will be working for them. But because then they haven't got the higher awareness, they're led in many different directions. And so they're looking, if you will, for like a parent figure, a figure that will lead them. And if they're children, it will be their parent or a caregiver or a teacher. And if they're adults, it'll be some kind of master, some kind of guru. And for many of those people, it's the mainstream media. That's the parent figure. So they'll turn on the television and they'll listen to the news, and that's what they follow. And unfortunately, that's one of the systems used by the negative group that are polarizing negative in order to hijack fear. So what you're seeing on this mainstream news channel is actually an illusion. It isn't real. You're being misled, but those people don't know that. So that's kind of like this Pied Piper leading the lambs to the slaughter kind of energy. That's what it means. It's a metaphor. For those individuals who have a higher awareness but are also in fear, they will be integrating that fear much more rapidly. And the fear doesn't take hold in the same way that it does with those that are not in that higher awareness, because they're always working it out, thinking, why am I afraid? What does this fear mean? And then that guidance, that frequency leading them into the positive polarization is much more evident to them, and they understand synchronicity. So for those people, they have a head start. For those people, it's very similar to going into the channeling and making a connection, and it is relaxing and just really chilling and allowing things to flow, because there are people who are jumping on every single piece of information that comes their way. Oh, there's a solar flare and it's going to frazzle the earth and people are going to die. Oh no, actually the solar flare isn't going to kill us. What it's going to do is do this, and then that might cause a tsunami, and then if I'm in a boat, then I'll end up being drowned, and then they let the mind go, and there's no cohesion in the focus. And sadly, or from another perspective, it's supposed to be, there are actual people out there teaching these things, that are teaching this kind of sort of negative scenario within a positive reality. These are positively polarized individuals who think what they're picking up is true because they've woken up, because they're in that state of imagination, and they're able to work with the images and the sounds and the feelings. They're channeling, if you will, downloading, if you will, whatever word you want to use, and they're getting all of these images and they're taking them literally. Like, oh, I had a dream, there was a tsunami and half the planet drowned. So they're then telling everyone, you're all going to drown. So the image they are getting is correct. The interpretation is incorrect. And that's because they are not at the stage yet where they have balanced the right hemisphere of the brain and the left hemisphere of the brain and working with intuition and creativity and balancing it equally with logic and critical thinking. That's the grounded side. If you don't have both, then you are out of balance one way or another. So if you're getting images of tsunamis drowning everyone, what does that mean? A flood of energy moving over the planet, a tsunami of knowledge, a tsunami of awareness, a tsunami of memory, a tsunami of emotion. And yes, there might be an actual physical presentation in the world that looks like that, but it won't be on a global level. So there's lots and lots of things that are causing these fears right now. And they're coming from outside sources because people are still, even in that higher awareness, if they're still not cohesive, they're looking for that parent figure. So it's like, it's this guru, it's this teacher, it's this channel, it's this doctor, it's this speaker. And then they're following that speaker. And then somebody else might be following a different speaker, and then those people will have an argument because their speaker is right. But any person who's in a position where they could be perceived as guru, like a parent figure, like us three, anyone in that position who is in a cohesive state will say repeatedly over and over and over again, don't follow me. I'm simply sharing my perspective. The true perspective is within you. I don't want followers. I'm not a leader, if you will. And they will present that. But what that tends to do is take you into a state of humility and authenticity, which makes people follow you even more, which is great if they are cohesive themselves. So you have these multiple layers going on in this aspect of humanity that are in fear. And those that have the higher awareness, relaxation, taking stock of everything, going with the flow, and learning to balance what's coming in the inner world with what is coming towards them in the outer world, and vice versa, and not subscribing to any belief until they have found this resonance within. That is so, so important, because that resonance within is what will show you what is accurate or what is something for you to take note of. There's a lot of nonsense all around there. And like I said, when I said sadly some people are teaching this, from the other point of view, there is a reason. Everybody has a part to play. And how can you discover what is in resonance with you and therefore truthful for you and right for you to follow if you do not have what is not in resonance and what is wrong and what is not truthful also presented? So those that are presenting a false teaching are actually, from the overall point of view, doing the seekers a favor because they're giving them contrast. There's multiple layers to look at there. So the number one is to relax, to not take anything at face value. Don't jump on the first thing you see, whether it's mainstream media, whether it's coming from alternative media, or whether it's coming from your own dreams and insight. Take it on board, look at it, don't subscribe to it. See it as a potential tool, a potential piece of information for you to examine, and then find resonance. That is what you do first, and then you will know where to place this information. It's like with me, I've been asked, probably I would say well over 100 times this week, what are the monoliths? What are the monoliths, Magenta? Tell us now, what are they? Are they from extraterrestrials? Are they from the negative group? Are they man-made? Are they an art project? Are they good? Are they bad? The thing is, I don't know. I haven't had any information yet. I haven't had any information from the nine about them yet. There's a little bit of information, but it isn't enough for me to deliver. So I am not going to answer that question until I have found my resonance. So in many ways, I may get an answer instantly. But when something is complex and there are multiple layers to that something, and also when something is irrelevant for our ascension, I don't necessarily get that communication from the 9 because I focus on the most relevant and the most important place to go for information that will assist the greatest number of people. And that may not be the monoliths or whatever question you're asking me. So I personally will wait until I find the resonance and I examine, and it may take me time. This is what people need to do as well. Examine everything. Don't jump on it. Don't take it at face value. Don't react to it, because if you're instantly in fear, you're upset, you're devastated, whatever emotion it may be, that sends you off track and you can't find the resonance. You need to be in a neutral observer state, an objective state, and a very joyful state, actually, to find resonance. And if you're fearful and upset, you aren't going to find your resonance. Then when you've got there, then you can look at the information. That's really the greatest advice I can give. And I think the next step is, how do you find your resonance? I guess that's the next sort of question I would ask myself, really.
That's the next one that I've got written down here as you're talking.
Yeah, I thought it was. Yeah, I mean, there's a very simple method that the 9 taught me. So my name is Magenta. So I would say to myself, it's really bodily kinesiology, if you will. The heart and the body is an electrical magnetic frequency, and if you can feel it, it's able to tell you things, because it is everything. You are communicating with yourself when you're looking at something outside of you. Everything is part of yourself, so you're able to feel it. It's just another part of your body when you know that. So if I say my name is Magenta, what am I feeling when I say it? Now, many people may feel nothing. That's okay. That's not wrong. You haven't failed because you're feeling nothing. Wait, do something else, come back, say it again. My name is Magenta. Obviously, you'll say your name, not Magenta. My name is Magenta. Are you feeling a kind of a balance? Are you feeling something that's just telling you that's right, that's truthful? Do you see a white light? Do you see a line? Are you seeing a star? Have you got a pixie in front of you going, yes, that's your name? Whatever it is, that's unique and right for you. Then if I say, my name is Janet, what am I feeling? Nothing. Or am I feeling that that's a little bit wrong? Do I just know that that's not true? Am I feeling that that's off kilter, out of balance? Do I have a being in front of me going, no, that's not your name? Whatever it is, as I said, and you work with this. This takes practice. You work with your name because it's the one thing that is true to you. If you don't like your name and you are in an advanced state of awareness, you may find that when you say your name, you're going to get an energy that says, no, that's not your name. That's okay too. Find something else that you know is true, as in, I live in this country, or whatever it is. Find something that is true to you and say it, and then say something that's not true to you, and feel the difference, and pay attention to your emotions, your thoughts, your mind, and the visuals you have around you. Pay attention to everything. Write it down if need be, and work with it. Then, when you have got a really good understanding of what's true and what's not by working with your name or this one question, then try it with something else. It takes practice. It's like a pianist learning to play the piano. You're not going to play a concerto or a symphony the first time someone hands you a piano. You're going to be practicing for days and months and weeks and potentially years before you're at performance level. It's the same with this. Work with that resonance. Things are happening much faster right now when you do this, because the energy is, if you will, in a higher frequency state. So 100 years ago, you may have to work for 6 months to a year on this to actually understand your resonance, whereas now potentially with the correct aligned cohesive intention, you can do this in half a day, a week perhaps. So the next step would then be to work with other things, and then start working with the big things. This news broadcast, this channeler, this whoever it is, or what bit of information, this article, this video. Then you can start working out what is true and what is not true, and trusting that resonance within.
Yeah, I feel like that's one of the most important take-home messages for this video in general, because it's like, I feel like when we really do connect to that inner guidance like that resonance, that's the part that can't really be hijacked, right?
Exactly.
Because what I've, in my field, I mean, we are inundated with scientific literature, and what I've noticed over the years is most of the scientific literature is crap. It's completely biased in it, and it appeals to only that left brain thinking. And there's so many times I'm reading something, I'm like, what? I'm like, nothing about that sounds or resonates as being true to me. But this is where you can also be hijacked. And in a lot of ways, I feel like this is where people have been disconnected from that gut level of intuition and heart wisdom, because we're being told by authority figures that this is right and what you are feeling is wrong because we have proof.
Exactly.
And that's been a piece that's driven me crazy from I shouldn't say it's driven me crazy. If anything, it's actually even strengthened my own sovereignty around what I feel is actually right, and dialing into that more, because it becomes so obvious when I see something that just doesn't fit right. And then it's nice when you can also find that those things get debunked in different ways that, people sometimes like to see for their own sort of proof. But even the word proof is, to me, it's like the most proof is really what ultimately connects into this area for myself.
Absolutely. You really do need to let go of the desperation for proof. Proof is great if it's truthful and honest, but proof is open to hijacking, and proof can be falsified. So many people will look for proof, but when you take it from the other perspective, there are individuals who follow their heart and their gut feeling and ignore proof, and yet the heart and the gut feeling is out of balance. And so this is what gives the, if you will, new age movement a bad name, because you have a lot of people who are like, well, this feels right to me and that feels right to me, and it's completely off the planet and completely nowhere near grounded reality whatsoever. So it is very much a balance of the two, which is the right hemisphere of the brain, the intuition, balanced with the left hemisphere of the brain. There has to be an understanding of both and a working with both. So you can take proof, but don't take proof without intuition. And don't reject proof because your intuition is saying that that proof is wrong if you haven't balanced your intuition. Then you can look at proof. And when you're in that cohesive state, then you can say, this proof is a lie, this isn't accurate proof. But when you get to that stage, you can then look behind that proof and think, there is actually some proof out there for this. I can see it. I don't know where I can find it, but I know it exists. Or you may even get to the stage where you look and think, there is no proof on this planet whatsoever for this truth. And because we're dealing with esoteric, metaphysical, otherworldly concepts, there are many truths that there's no proof for. And that's part of this search and part of this journey and part of this whole 2012 choice-making bifurcation reality. It's about letting go of externalized presentation and moving within and trusting within. And in my early days of working with white spirit, they used to call this inner proof, because there was no proof for what this white spirit was telling me, but I had to learn about resonance, and they called this inner proof. So it's working with everything, but it's being logical and having this sort of critical thinking, connecting the dots as well. Like, for example, the monoliths. I usually go with intuition only because I've been doing this for many, many years. I don't really need to read things that much. But if you're new to intuition and awakening and it's working for you, but you haven't been doing this necessarily a long time and you're not quite sure of it, then you can balance that with what you're reading. And as you said, you can read things and you can think, this just doesn't seem right. It's like 20% of it's true, but all of this other stuff is added on. It's all left framed. Where is the actual depth to this, the actual truth behind it? And the reason why most of the scientific literature and the historical literature and all the other literature, it's deliberate, because those few individuals that are polarizing within the negative path, if they were to give us truth, they wouldn't be able to polarize negative, because their path is different. It's not about giving to others, it's about using others for their own benefit. That's the service to self. So they're not going to give truth to others. And the negative individuals that are polarizing in the negative path have been doing this for such a long time that they've amassed great wealth and power, and are able to use many different systems to control the other humans. So there's a sort of fight between good and evil going on this planet, if you will, as it says in many religious texts. That's all true if you take it from that perspective. But really, this is a negative and positive frequency working itself out. And 2020 is about balancing that frequency and then moving into a new presentation of reality, where that intense polarization between negative and positive is no longer needed for the experience of the souls that are existing within that reality. So that polarization changes, and the positive and the negative doesn't hold the extreme levels that they do right now here. And that's what 2020 is about. It's about showing us that. So all the questions that you're asking are all tied up and all part of the same presentation.
Yeah, go.
Magenta, you spoke about resonance, and I'm wondering if you can elaborate a little bit on what that resonance is actually connected to.
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. I mean, from a spiritual point of view, you would say the heart chakra, and you would say the solar plexus chakra, which is the belly, so the gut feeling, aligned with the heart chakra. But actually, you can go beyond the sort of energetic presentation and look at the physical body. And there are, I'm not a biologist, and this is something way out of my own understanding, but from what the nines show me, there are certain structures within the brain, the heart, the digestive system and the gut, and all the nerves, and these work in ways that most people in traditional medicine and biology don't understand. It's because it uses a pathway that is not seen in microscopes. It's like light, and it's a quantum aspect of the body. And when you activate that, that is what is working for you. It's a space within the body, within the heart, the brain, and as I said, the digestive system, the gut, the blood, is in the bone, it's in all the parts of the body. But because it's quantum, it's a particle that exists in more than one space at the same time. So it matches itself with what is perceived as outside of you, but that's actually, it's the same particle. So it's like a consciousness, a light. So if you are looking at a video or a person or an article, and you are looking at that information, when you're going into your resonance, these filaments start working, these threads of light start connecting with the particles of consciousness that your thought is bringing into your own body by looking at this piece of information, and they're aligning together or not, as the case may be. So it is actually a physical thing that is happening, but because of my lack of understanding of biology, I wouldn't be able to do your question justice in a way that perhaps somebody who was channeling and understood biology would be able to do, because there are systems of the body that I don't have the knowledge for.
Thank you. So as far as within the body, you're mentioning, I think we've heard this from some ancient tribes as well, where they talk about our brain actually being first in the gut, then the heart, then lastly in our head. And so where is that connected to? Like, where are we getting that inner knowing through the connection to something out there that we're able to then process that information and deem it to be true or not?
Amazing question. That wasn't on the list, was it?
No.
No, it's really good. So I would not say from the information I have from the 9 that it's a linear thing, whereas the brain is in the gut first, the heart second, the brain third. From what I'm seeing is it's all happening at the same time. In a biological sense, this would be a chemical messenger system. So I presume within the DNA and the RNA, which I really don't know anything about, but I know that there are chemical structures within the DNA that make like letters. That there are letters that scientists and biologists use to categorize DNA. So that's kind of where it comes from. And the 9 call this flame letters and fire letters. The DNA has like a language. It's like a cosmic library. Now, what is also interesting regarding your question, and I don't really understand this, but the 9 have said to me many, many times, we are neurotransmitters. We use peptides in order to pass messages. They call this the crystal river, which is actually the Schumann resonance. The Schumann resonance within the planet actually runs through our body as well. It's like a meridian system of these lines of energy, and this runs through our body. They call this the crystal river, but in the body this would be like this neurotransmitter pathway where messages are passed electrically through the body, and they give off these different codes. And if the body isn't working well due to the mind, the thoughts, the lifestyle, the diet, or any kind of illness, then there can be problems and blocks with that pathway. If somebody is in balance and in health, then that pathway is working really, really well. However, having said that, people can be unwell and trigger these pathways in even stronger ways than people who are healthy. It isn't just about illness. So yes, they say we are neurotransmitters. The other thing they say to me is, and the reason why I got this information actually was I was talking to somebody who had no idea what I was talking about, but was trying to understand what I was doing. This person had taken recreational substances, mind-altering substances in the past, and so had certain experiences in that journey that they would just know as a trip, a bad trip. So because they had that knowledge, the 9 were using that information to explain to this person what they were. And I didn't know any of this. It kind of freaked me out at the time, actually, because I don't like anything to do with mind-altering substances. But what they actually said was, we flood her body with this psychotropic chemical when we are in communication. Now, this was quite a few years ago, and I've since spoken to the 9, and I now know that obviously there is a chemical within us, within our body, within the pineal gland. It's very similar to DMT. And when the 9 are communicating, so they're neurotransmitters, they're working with these peptides, this crystal river, this messenger pathway, DNA, RNA, but they also are DMT, or rather they are the reaction to DMT. And DMT, and it's not actually DMT, is very, very similar. It's slightly different, and it's a quantum version of it because it's outside of just your body, but it is in your body. So that moves into a very high level in my body when I start to speak to the 9. But because I've worked with them for so long, I can switch it off and turn it on at will. So when I decide to turn it on, my body is just flooded with this stuff. And then when I want to turn it off, it shuts down. That doesn't happen when you're a beginner. So this is why when you first flood your body with this stuff and you're channeling and opening up, and then somebody comes into the room who isn't like you, You'll instantly look at that person and see that they're different, and it'll freak you out because you're in a different space, and you'll think, can they see where I am? And you can't come down from it. And that's what's called being ungrounded. And that person will be, what's wrong with you? And then you get all paranoid. That's normal in the early days. That did actually happen to me in the early days. It takes practice to switch it off, because what it is it's a flood of chemical. And so you have to work with it. And it's interesting that we're on this subject, because with 2020, one of the choices that we are making is, do we move forward and evolve organically, which will be with this organic chemical, allowing this chemical to flood our body and allow us to be at one with our environment and with the universe? Or do we shut that chemical off? Do we shut this ability off? Do we close this messenger system down and no longer connect with this crystal river? And then we find an artificial way of doing it. These are the choices. And one of the things that is a representation of that choice is what I call the Maxine. It rhymes with Maxine. I don't often say the word because it can be flagged, especially if you've got your videos going on certain platforms. That's one of the choices. But that's a very literal interpretation, because there's so much more. When you're in that state and you've made that positive choice, you move into a creation of your own reality. So that doesn't really come into your reality. Also, there are those that are going to make the choice because they think it's the right choice, but another part of their body is leading them elsewhere. So things will go wrong for them. They'll try to take the Maxine, and their appointment gets cancelled, or it gets muddled up with somebody else, or their car breaks down, or there's so much and so much complexity. But that is one of the choices. And the positive polarization choice is about learning to flood the body with this DMT chemical more and more and more. We are allowing this to come into our bodies in ever increasing ways. But what we have to do is learn how to hold it, because if you have too much of it too quickly without learning how to assimilate it, you get what's called burnout. It floods the body too much, and then you are drained afterwards, and can have like a sort of a paranoid or ungrounded experience. So we are learning in balance, which is why I have said relax, chill, take a breath, go with the flow. There's no right way or wrong way to do this. This is something the Nine have guided me with since day one, because I very much have a tendency to burn out, because in the early days, I could get very, very excited that it was White Spirit at the time would show me a concept. I would then realize the concept, and the first time I realized the concept, I'd literally freak out, and I'd be like, wow. And then I'd go completely ungrounded. I couldn't close this chemical down. I didn't know what it was then. And I'd be walking around seeing lights, and that isn't good when you're doing your shopping and you're trying to pay your bills and you're driving a car or you're having a conversation with someone. And I'd be off. That's what's called being a fluffy bunny or a space cadet. But it happens to you. It happens because this isn't easy. You are navigating enlightenment, which is a growth from a carbon-based system to a crystalline-based system. Your DNA is completely changing form. So it takes time. But as I said, now in 2020, the energies are more conducive than they were sort of 20, 30 years ago. So this sort of wow factor is what I would call it. White Spirit would always say, calm down, because if I was to stay too much in this, wow, I can't believe this concept, oh my goodness, my mind is blown. If I stayed there for too long, I'd lose contact with White Spirit, because I wasn't depressed or upset, but I had gone into burnout, which is more akin to an out of balance excitement. It's not really excitement. It's more like, it's just an emotion that isn't in balance. And every emotion has a chemical reaction attached to it. So this DMT flooding, if you will, is attached to chemicals from emotions. So in fear, you're releasing these lower emotions. that are akin to that closing down, shutting off path. Love and compassion is the right space, the balance, the service, the caring for others, the good, nice feelings, you being a good person. But this whole wow thing is a bit sort of too out of balance. So you have to just get that space right and stay in that central point. And it is a merge between the observer perspective, being neutral, observing without actually having any emotion, and at the same time having this pleasant, beautiful feeling that feels very much like euphoria, bliss, and joy in a nice balanced flow. That's the place to be. And when you're there, that's the crystal river, and that is your discernment, and that's your alignment, and that's your ascension, and that's that positive choice that we're making in 2020. So that is part of all these chemicals in the body. So I hope that's answered your question. I don't know if it has, probably fully.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I actually think even as you were describing what that feeling or what that state would be like, I thought, well, we're actually in that state when we spend time in nature.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking.
Yes, absolutely. Because nature has those same codes in abundance. These, the 9 called light codes, these filaments of particles in the leaves and the stems and the trunks of the trees and the ground, and it's in the sea hugely, in the ocean, and the salt of the ocean, and it's in all animals. One thing that this is known as is manna, like in the Bible, or ormus is another way of gold within. It's like a golden mean frequency. It's a frequency that resonates at that golden mean Fibonacci sequence. That's the tone, the sound of bliss. And yes, it's in nature. Again, nature's been hijacked as well. So you can go into certain natural surroundings where everything's been changed and things are artificial. If you can get out in unspoilt nature, or nature that's been cultivated by people with an awareness and an understanding of natural order and natural shapes, your whole DNA merges with the environment that you're in, which is why people call these places sacred sites. But what actually happens in a sacred site is the DNA is merging with these particles outside. You are feeling cohesive with your environment, so it will help you feel bliss and joy and this high connection and trigger all of these feelings. That's what those places were for. That's what the pyramids were for. That's what Stonehenge was for. It was to do this for people. Of course, we don't need the sacred sites and the pyramids so much anymore, because the energy around the whole planet is naturally already at that frequency. That's why the negative groups are doing what they're doing, to try to bring the frequency down, because if it stays this high, everyone's going to wake up and they're going to suddenly see them and turn around and think, what have you been doing? And of course, that's what 2020 is all about.
That's awesome. A couple questions then around that. So one, when you were talking about DMT or the substances like DMT, it makes me think then there's going to be a transition with even where plant medicines play into things, because I know like they can be a benefit to a certain point, but then it sounds like as we keep evolving and shifting and we're making more of that, then there might not be as much benefit from that.
Or even mention
Exactly.
your patients too that you've seen.
Well,
and yeah, and like I mean, one of the areas I see a lot of in clinic is around mental health, right? And I mean, there's so many factors I feel like playing into stuff right now, and a lot of it's just misunderstood in so many ways too. But I've seen, so for example, for patients that I've seen that have gone through, say, psychosis or schizophrenia, that have had a diagnosis of that, regardless of all the other ways that could mean something else other than any kind of a problem. But one thing that I've seen across the board is that it's been triggered almost every time with a combination with cannabis. And it's really, so it's like, I almost think for some of those people that they're already at a certain level that they've taken something that has now pushed them too far over. and now it's created problems. But I'm just wondering about that, because I've seen other people have really beautiful experiences with different plant medicines. But it seems to me like if we keep progressing this way, we may not require them for certain things, and they might not have their benefit that they used to.
Absolutely. If somebody is waking up in a nice, cohesive balance, and they need to have a trigger to expand that more, and they've got a good grounding and a good balance of logic and intuition, then a plant medicine will assist them, because it will gently open up their expansion and they'll have wonderful experiences. If somebody has already reached a space where they have enough of that chemical in them already, and they're already doing this naturally, to actually then step in and take a plant medicine is going to give them burnout and push them too far the other way. And often the result of that will be an anxiety. So you're tipping out of that beautiful resonant flow into an induced sort of cross between excitement and fear. You've pushed yourself too far. With psychosis, what happens there is there's trauma in the individual, so much trauma, and that trauma has not been unraveled and dealt with, and then that person begins to activate and wake up spiritually and activate that DMT chemical and all of those things, yet the trauma's there too. So what actually happens is everything is magnified. When you flood your body with these chemicals, whether it's through spiritual experience or through plant medicine, what that does is amplify everything. And unfortunately, that then amplifies the trauma because it hasn't been dealt with, and the body wants to deal with it. The body is constantly saying, deal with this, deal with this. But if it's so bad, the body as a protective mechanism, I'm sure you will know, will hide it. We can't look at this, it's too traumatic. It's going to harm us, so we're going to tuck it away. Then you flood the body with these chemicals through meditation, spiritual awareness, or plant medicine, and out comes the trauma before it's ready to be looked at. So there's all these different ways of this chemical, wherever it's coming from, and how it can work with the person. So the person needs to be already in a balanced state, working with the logic, the grounded, critical thinking, the intuition in a nice balance, a good place, and then they'll have good experiences from plant medicine. Or it may be that there's a health condition that they need to work with and they'll have good experiences. That person needs to be working with, we were speaking of resonance, one needs to look at the plant medicine or the spiritual activation and think to themselves, is this right for me to do? They need to know themselves. I know for me, to take plant medicine would be a huge mistake, huge mistake, because I'm already flooded with that stuff. Can I actually hold the plant and tune in on the energy of it and get benefit? Yes. Could I stand next to somebody who has taken it and hold their hand for a short while and tune in on them? Yes, because I can stop it. But if I were to actually take it into my body, that would be completely not in alignment with me. And there are many who are in that state that have got to that point where they flooded the body with that chemical. So for them, it wouldn't be a good thing. But there's a place for them. Otherwise, they wouldn't be growing wild. There's absolutely a place for them. And they are medicines for the right person. That's the same with foods and herbs and raw cacao and all of these things.
That's so true. It's like, I mean, if one thing, anybody that's also worked with people for a long time, you eventually kind of discover that there's no one diet, there's no one this, there's no one that. It's so completely individual, and even constantly keeps changing for that individual at different times in their life, depending on where they're at. You know, what they were doing for maybe 20 years that they thought worked really well, eventually it's like, it's just not working. And then it gets to the point where we need to start to listen to the body and listen to what the messages are coming up.
Yes, and it's a constant tweaking and a constant reevaluation. And sometimes you can have a physical body need and a spiritual body need, or your belief system is out of whack with the physical need. And that's very difficult to work with as well. Because, for example, you may have a vegan philosophy and not want to eat animals, but the body may need to have some kind of nutrient that isn't found in the plant kingdom, and they need that nutrient to balance themselves before they go vegan. This is why there's in the nutrition movement, there's so much argument and fighting, and so much dogma, as in this is the right way to eat and this is the right way to eat. And whilst there are guidelines and there are templates that's right for the majority of humanity, a species specific diet, there are different cultures that evolved in different ways. People who have had different, they're coming from different star systems, they've got different energetic makeup, so that their needs are slightly different. So it is, yes, there's a one size fits all as a template, but that is not going to be personalized. One has to personalize that species specific template for themselves and their culture and their history as well. So the arguments in the nutrition movement are not particularly very helpful to us when we're trying to find out what we should eat.
Well, and I feel like all of it's still just information to kind of get us to have to come back and pay attention to what works for us and honor that so much more, rather than just assuming that something else makes sense. You know, it might be a good idea to, because it makes sense maybe on a certain level, then try it out and then see how it actually feels. But I think that's the key point, is how does it actually make you feel? And is it working in your life? You know, like when I was reading your book again, this one, the one that breaks down some of the diet, the lessons from a living Lemuria. I mean, there were so many parts that even made me, I burst out laughing at one point, because it's like they were talking about a traditional Lemurian diet, and it was like almost like a fruitarian in a lot of ways, like a lot of fruits. And then they were even saying like one of the most potent ones was citrus. And it's like our 3-year-old, we jokingly, she eats fruit all the time.
She wakes up in the middle of the night
wanting fruit. And oranges particularly. And we actually joke because we call her a lemur before, because she's just sort of this cute little, like even like a lemur, like a monkey, the way she does stuff. But I read that, I just started laughing, and I told Tam, like, oh my gosh, she's totally like Lemurian. Like it's like just, and my older one, who was 4 at the time, they're both like 3 and 4, so they're little. But her favorite fruit for a long time was like catnip for her was grapefruit. You know, and it's like it's just so funny. And it's like even my concept around what I thought from a very strict nutritional perspective, it opened up a lot of different doors for me to think about it, because it so depends on just where you are vibrationally with different things. And what I would do in clinic, because I would see a lot of patients that were vegan, and I'd run through different tests that we could at least measure for. So things like, you know, basic nutrients like B12 or iron, or some of these things that sometimes can be low or not absorbed as well. And then things like conversion of fatty acids, which you also talk about in your book, which I thought was great, because that was one of the questions I had, because I would find some patients did totally fine. And I see couples coming in eating exactly the same diet, and one was thriving on it and one's body was falling apart. And you know, and it makes more sense to me now that it's sort of like, if this makes sense, that as we kind of keep transitioning, the idea of just less and less suffering on the planet, that just makes sense. But but sort of honoring where your body is at the time and doing the best you can with things, that feels so right to me.
Absolutely. And it's continuous reevaluation all the time. And you don't have to be perfect. I actually was very resistant to writing anything about nutrition. I don't think I'm necessarily a physically good example for somebody who is following good nutrition. I am overweight. I have a problem with being overweight for one reason or another, and find it difficult to lose weight. So I expected I should have been really thin and skinny and gorgeous to write a nutrition book. But the 9 was saying to me, this is not about you. Yeah, the 9 was saying to me, this isn't about you being perfect. This is about you working with a plan and reevaluating it. And obviously the information came from the 9 anyway. And the book isn't specific to nutrition. It's karma in nutrition, actually, which is a whole different flavor. So I thought, you know, I'm gonna just speak to the 9. I'm gonna talk to them. I'm gonna write this out, and then I will make the decision what to do with this book once it's written. Do I actually release it or not? Because I had this issue in me that the one thing I mustn't touch is nutrition. And yet What the 9 reminded me is, yes, okay, I still have an issue with weight loss. That's true. But there are many things that nutrition and the path that I have followed with nutrition over the years have helped me with that are not necessarily seen in my physical appearance. And I'm talking about health issues and how I have managed to work with health issues that perhaps might render somebody else unable to do things. And I'm able to navigate through my life and the health issues I have through the nutritional path. And it's also not about being perfect. Sometimes I'll go 3 or 4 days and I'll think, I haven't followed the 9's information the last 4 days. I've just been eating like, you know, gluten-free bread with some, you know, mock meat inside. I am vegan, by the way. And I'm constantly evaluating that. I'm not saying it's the right path, but it's right for my philosophy and beliefs and vibration. It may not be right for me physically. That's something I am still evaluating. But then I'll think, well, I've just had some mock meat, which isn't in the book. You know, doesn't the 9 haven't said eat that, and some gluten-free bread. That's not in the book. And then I stop and catch myself, and I have to go back again to the species-specific diet, the Lemurian diet that the 9 are talking about. Go back to nature. Look at what I have in my house. Where's my fruit? Where's my vegetables? Where's the nuts and the seeds and all of those things? So it's not about being perfect. It's a journey. And I think in the nutrition movement, there is so much accusation against you, and so much guilt can come about within a person who's trying to find a path. And I think that those arguments and that accusation and those guilt feelings are detrimental to finding the path. Having said that, all of this information is obviously there because this is a year of 2020 vision, and we are having a deluge of information on every single level. So the 9 took things back to a very simplified form when they spoke about if there were to be a species-specific diet for an ascending individual, for starseed. The diet's different for those who have taken a different path, who are not wanting to polarize or ascend. And then there are different forms of ascension as well. So the basic template was this simulation or copy of what the Lemurians ate, because the Lemurians came down from a non-physical vibrational existence into a physical. So they had to come from light and ambrosia as their sustenance down into eating liquids and then solid foods, and that's how they densified. And then eventually they would no longer be vegan or vegetarian. That's how they were densifying down into 3D. We're doing the opposite if we are ascending. And where are we in our ascension process? And what kind of ascension are we going through? There's no judgment from the 9 at all about what anyone eats or what dietary plan they follow. It's literally, the book is literally a tool for guidance for those who want to understand what foods will do to your vibration and how you can work with those foods and still have a higher vibration, or whether those foods aren't actually going to affect your vibration. Are they going to hinder your ascension or not? That's really what the book is about. And yeah, I think there was a lot packed into it because it's a fairly small book.
And I think what resonated with me so much is it was very digestible in the sense that it did feel like zero judgment on anything. It was just, here's what we're having to say. You'd ask awesome questions regularly throughout the book, which fine-tunes so many questions, like even from people that have more of like a scientific basis on wanting to understand certain things. It made so much sense. And it's like, for a book that kind of, like I totally agree with you, in nutrition field, it's like, it's so polarized and there's a lot of judgment and guilt that people feel around diet all the time. And to talk about the breakdown that you talked about specifically, and to have it in such just a nice neutral way, it was just so easy to read, where a lot of times you don't want to read certain books because you're kind of feeling judgment as you're reading them. So, but that never came up once in it. So I think like it's a great book for people to read to understand the best diet for the the aspect of star seeds and ascension for sure.
And they're real questions. They came from my social media page, from people who I posted on there, and this deluge of questions. And eventually I just thought, this is ridiculous. I'm just constantly on social media. I just as well write a book here. So that's when I took the questions and I thought, right, let's put this into a book for everyone. So I'm very grateful for the individuals who asked the questions. Yeah.
Yeah, no, they did a great job. One thing I did wonder about is it talked about particularly with light codes, and you had mentioned light codes earlier, and they said that light codes are in the raw plant material. Are there no light codes then when people start to like I'm thinking like especially where we were more in like Ontario, we were in like when it gets cold, it's cold. So it's like you go through a big chunk, like about 6 months out of the year where it's, it's winter snowy a lot of the time. And so to have like raw, foods in some ways, when I think of it, even from like, Chinese medicine perspectives, and even what I'm generally drawn to, I'm not drawn to like a salad in the middle of winter. I want like a soup or like a hearty root vegetable kind of stew or something along those types of lines. But then I was interested around that. So do all the light codes disappear when they get cooked, or how does that work?
I feel exactly the same as you. I mean, I'm in England. I mean, you can't get colder really. And I don't want to eat a salad in the middle of winter. And I love stews and casseroles and soups and things. Sadly, the light codes do diminish with heat. Like the raw foodists will say, the 9 are confirming that. They don't necessarily disappear. It really depends on how far away from the original form of that food that food has moved. So if you're taking, say, a potato and cooking a potato, yes, the light codes will diminish, but they're not going to disappear entirely. Not that potatoes have them particularly in abundance anyway, but it's not the greatest example, but they're not going to disappear entirely depending on the method of the cooking. So, I mean, if you're sticking them in the microwave, you'll hardly have any left, because that's not really a conducive way of cooking. But if they're put into like a stone oven or cooked in you can get crock pots where they're cooked and they retain the heat, they're going to diminish, but they're not going to disappear entirely, because that potato hasn't really been changed. Whereas if you go to the chip shop and get a portion of chips, that's been changed, it's been fried in oils and fats, so it's gone further, it's gone more steps away. Raw foods do hold the highest form of light codes, but there are also some indigestible aspects to some raw foods. So things like beans hold light codes, but they do diminish. But then there are some raw beans where the indigestible aspect is higher than, it is more likely to harm you than the light codes are going to help you. So some foods need to be cooked to be eaten, unless you're one of those individuals that only wants to eat foods that you can eat raw, and some people take that path. Things that have been like preserved in sugars, like say take fruit. Now frozen fruit, that preserves the light codes because it's still raw. And if you were to take frozen fruit and then cook the fruit, if you're cooking in certain ways, slower cooking, you'd still retain some light codes there. But if you say eat tinned fruit, there really aren't any light codes left in the tinned fruit. It's the same sort of thing as enzymes, but really what the light codes are is mana or ormus. That's what the light codes are. That's known as the mana in the Bible. And this was in abundance in Lemuria, because they were coming down from a light body. Then so was the environment. So it was a freshly formed environment in matter, and the light codes were everywhere. But obviously, as the density of this planet densified down into 3D, the light codes diminished as well in the foods that the humans were eating. So yes, they do diminish. I'm trying to think if there's anything you could cook that would keep a high level of light code. Coconut oil, coconut products.
Yeah.
I think that's probably in the book. That they don't diminish. They actually don't diminish no matter what you do with coconuts, unless you're, you know, turning it into some kind of sweet and adding things to it. But keeping it in its natural state, they don't diminish. And I think mushrooms also were fairly good at holding the light codes, even if they are cooked. So it's about how much are you changing the food. It's not necessarily about the food being raw. And there are other ways of getting light codes. You don't have to get light codes from food. Light codes come into your body from flooding your body with that chemical as well. And they're in nature too. So you can absorb them through the skin as well as through the body and through the mind and through the consciousness. But if you want to go through ascension in balance, in the in the way that is offered to humanity, in the way that is for your highest good, Stargate ascension, accelerated ascension, then you would need to get your light codes from every source that you can, as often as you can. But again, you wouldn't rush it. You don't want to burn out. You want to do what's right for the whole body. And you're not going without the physical body, you're taking the physical body with you. So if there's something in the physical body that still needs to be worked upon, then you wouldn't rush off into a raw food diet. You think, well, hold on, maybe I need this. Maybe I wouldn't be vegan. Maybe I need to do this and that. Or I need to see a functional nutritionist. I need to have blood tests taken. I need to see what I'm low in. There's all these different levels that you have to work on. But yeah, light codes do diminish when they're cooked, but they don't disappear entirely if the food is still in its original state.
Okay, and get them from other places. So nature, you get light codes, you get them from their diet.
Yes.
Where else can you get light codes from?
Well, they are in thoughts as well. Certain thoughts that are high vibrational, and they can be presented to the pineal gland, which is a receiver of image and a projector of image. The crystalline aspect of the pineal gland makes thought reality, and vice versa, makes reality non-reality. It works as a gateway between the two worlds. So certain sigils, when worked with in balance and meditated upon, can create a reaction within the pineal gland, within the emotion and within the thought, and generate your own light codes. Eventually, people can move into a pathway if they're taking that positive polarization now in 2020, and they're moving into Stargate ascension and going forward, either as self or within a reincarnational path. And the reincarnation is actually different. It's not the reincarnational wheel that you have no say over. It is a choice that you make when you take that path. Eventually you can get to a point where you don't actually need to take food, and that's the Lemurians. They came down, but they still consumed when the minute there was some form, even if it's non-physical, some form outside of thought would take in sustenance from the environment, but it would just be a light transference, and then it would come down, and that's the ambrosia, the frequency, the golden nectar of energy, and then it would be liquid. So that would be the next pathway. But again, this is something that is a long way off for a great many people. Mm-hmm. There are people here now that live as breatharian, and I would personally say that the amount of breatharian individuals that are actually surviving and taking in light codes from their environment and generating it in their bodies naturally are extremely rare. These are rare individuals. Most individuals are nowhere near that level, but they do exist. And most of them you don't even hear about, because they're at a level where they wouldn't necessarily want to be out on social media talking. They are busy communing with nature and moving into more of a unified path, which may call for them to be isolated and go into a oneness with the higher energies. So there are individuals that can do this, but they are rare.
How are you doing right now, Magenta, for time?
Yeah.
We've had you for, are you okay still?
I am okay, yeah.
Okay, just want to be cognizant of your time and stuff. I know most of the interviews we've been doing have been lasting for like a good couple of hours sometimes too. So
would you be able to, Magenta, give a little bit of a background for people who are not familiar with the Lemurians and what exactly that means, and even a little bit of maybe history of Atlantis, if you're able to dive into that?
So the Lemurians is just one name for these beings. They've had multiple names over the years. I'm not familiar what the other names are because the nine referred to them as the Lemurians, but what they're talking about is consciousness moving from the light levels, the non-physical levels, into physical form, coming down through those light levels into matter and becoming matter themselves. So really what these individuals are doing are the consciousness within these individuals, the consciousness is in a unified state. It's a source consciousness. And as the form moves away from the non-form, then the consciousness separates from the oneness of consciousness. It's a journey that source chooses to take and the individuals choose to take. So there were several stages. Lemuria took, I don't even know how long. I mean, there's no time in the higher realms. So this is a never-ending, ever evolving state, which is why the book is called Lessons from a Living Lemuria, because they still exist. They haven't gone anywhere because, yes, they're in our past, but in the higher levels before they actually did come down into matter, they exist in a no time. So they're there now, and they're us. That's who we are. All of humanity are these beings. So there were many stages to coming down into the physical form, and this took, if you want to look in a linear time, this would have took billions and billions of years to evolve. And they would come down and move into these ages, these civilizations and ages. And some of them would simply be a consciousness without a body, just an awareness of light and light. And then there would have been the next stage where there are bodies, light bodies. And then there would have been another stage where the body is more physical, but is still able to move into light. And everything is done through telepathy and thought transference, and there's still a huge amount of unity. And then the next stage, so Lemuria that the nine speak of encompasses all of this, but really that would be several ages of civilizations. So the Lemurians come down from the light levels into physicality, and eventually they have physical bodies, and then they are living on a physical planetary system. So the planet's evolving at the same time, or devolving, if you will. And that's what's known as the Garden of Eden. This is the Garden of Eden in the Bible. That's where Adam and Eve comes from. But Adam and Eve are just representatives of the polarization of the physical form, one into a male form, one into a female form. So Adam would have been a group of billions of people, and Eve is a group of billions of people, and the story is told in the Bible. And so that's the Garden of Eden. And so that's used as metaphor as well, but it's a literal incarnation. And then once the Lemurians were physical, that also would have taken billions of years to evolve. And then these individuals, some of them sort of branched off into different ways of thinking and became more, if you will, scientific, but they weren't really scientific. But what had happened is everything was very, very much right, what we would know as a right-brained way of thinking. The brains were different, so it wasn't really a right and left hemisphere of the brain, but everything was done through intuition. But as you come down in the density, that intuition changes because you are choosing to move into separation. So you eventually get to a point where you forget that you are source. So the Lemurians would have remembered their source. They would have all known they were unified with each other for a long, long time. But then they would come to a point where they forget that they're source. That's when they experience separation. And that's when all this jealousy comes in and free will. But that didn't come in until much later in the Lemurian stages. And when that level came in, civilizations began to branch off. They'd forgotten that they were source, and not all of them had forgotten. Some of them remembered, and they wanted to find ways to get back to source, get back to that place where they were. And many of these individuals had visions of the entire journey of this planet right up until now. They might not have known it was 2020. Some of them may have done, and they may have mapped it out, but they had different counting systems and different calendars back then. But many saw the whole journey and wanted to be part of that journey, and they understood about how to project themselves forwards into new incarnations. And these individuals branched off and they created a new civilization, Atlantis. But what actually happened was they came to a choice point that we're at now, like the bifurcation. It was like a change from one dimension to another. And there's a moment when, even though it takes many years, it's a time period, the time condenses. So instead of something evolving over millions of years, it evolves in, say, a decade or 30 years. Everything condenses into this much, much smaller time period. And that's the dimensional edge from one place to another. That's the shift. And this would have been more of a descension than an ascension back then. And that's when Atlantis was formed. And so Atlantis was from Lemuria. Having said that, and it gets even more complicated, is Lemurians were generally kind of left alone to evolve. But towards the end of their evolution, there was some infiltration in their evolution. Now, one could call this a willing, wanted assistance in their evolution, but on another level, one could call this deliberate infiltration. It's actually both, depending on the perspective you look at. So beings from other planetary systems, dimensions, civilizations that were evolving on a different timeline, in a different way, from different DNA intelligences that were more advanced than where the Lemurians were in a technological sense, came in and sort of changed these beings. And they used like they were what's known as master geneticists, but they didn't do this chemically. They didn't sort of come down in a spaceship, get out of the ship, grab hold of someone and start messing with their DNA. It was done through a light transference, but it was changing the planetary system at the time. And some of these beings were group minds. So it's really difficult to interpret this in a third dimensional sense, but these beings, which perhaps would have been perceived as gods back then, were group minds that had evolved as a planetary group. And the Lemurians had moved away from a group mind by this time, and they had become individual. And those that were from the group mind that had evolved on another stream were coming in and changing things. And this was where the Atlanteans came in. So the Atlantis was more of a product of outside influence. So the Atlanteans were very different, and they were given DNA quantum codes from other civilizations. So they then started to evolve very rapidly. And the Lemurians were very peaceful and harmonious and loving. They didn't understand separation. They didn't understand jealousy and war and argument. Even when they moved into physical bodies, they held and retained that knowing of being one with one another for a very, very long time. Some lost that, but it was the Atlanteans that were the product of those who had lost the understanding of that oneness. So, but they were also very advanced because they had this infiltration coming in from these other societies. And then they had this technological mind where they could work with what we would know today as free energy. But what it was like a crystal plasma substance that they were able to do things with. And it was a combination of their own intuition and a kind of a scientific way of working with this plasma crystal substance. And then they evolved, and that's Lemuria and Atlantis. And then the next sort of stage from the Atlanteans, so what they went through is what we're going through now, this bifurcation and having to make a choice. But by the time the Atlanteans got to that point of planetary completion, which was the age before this one, this negative group had already begun to incarnate and begun to polarize. And the negative group had come from the infiltration from some of these groups of group soul entities that had come in and infiltrated the Atlantean beings. So some of these were evolving from the negative codes that they'd had placed within them. And they came to a point where they had to make a choice. And you hear about the fall of Atlantis, and what actually happened there was the choice that had to be made would either be negative or positive as a polarization for that age. The predominant polarization is what then steers the collective timelines and convergences of timelines for the next age. And it was the negative polarity that took hold of the majority consciousness at the end of the Atlantean age, which is why it's called the fall of Atlantis. So since Atlantis, right through this age to where we are now, there's been a negative polarization rule. What's happening now is we are, as a collective, making the other choice. It is the positive polarization that is now the predominant one, which is why the negatives are doing all of this stuff in 2020, because they are not holding on to the structure which they've held on to since Atlantean times. And there's more to the story. It isn't just about DNA changes and infiltration from group soul, group mind, extraterrestrial energies. It's about the consciousness of the space around the planet. So it's, if you were to look at where the planet goes, and it's not just the planet, it's the entire solar system and the timelines. So it's actually multiple quantum universes within this universe that I'm talking about. If you were to look at the journey, it looks like a sine wave like this. And when the planet is down here, the negative has the polarity, because that's what the outside externalized aspect of self is, because you're in a negative time space, if you will. So it's really easy for the negative to do well because the energetics is conducive. And then you go up, and that's ascension, you're going up. And when you get up to the top, which is kind of where we are, well, not quite at the top yet, we're sort of here. When you get to the top, this is the, yeah, we've got a way to go yet, we're still climbing. This is the positive. And so the environment is then conducive for the positive polarization. And then this is when this huge evolution is made in soul growth. And no one knows what that will look like. No soul, no group soul. From a linear perspective, obviously source, there is no linear there. So source is all and everything, and it knows what it looks like. But from a somewhat linear perspective, and even a higher dimensional perspective, no one knows what this growth will look like. You can get an idea, and then you move back down. So this is a natural movement. And what it actually is, it's not this, it's actually this. It's a spiral, because that's the way nature is formed. So you're in this fractal, never-ending, infinite spiral that just goes on and on forever that way and forever that way. And that's what we're in. So there's a lot to the story as to why Lemuria and Atlantis, and to say Lemuria and Atlantis, it's basic. It's basic, and you know, the nine, in my years of speaking to them, I still haven't had enough time in my life to actually get to the bottom of the story in a linear sense, which is why if someone asks me a question that I don't know about, then the nine will come in and show me, or rather my mind will go into that memory space so that I can access that information, which is what I've just done, because nobody's asked me that question before. I'm aware of the Lemurian fall, but I wasn't fully aware of the Atlantean movement and the infiltration and the sort of the environmental, you know, I was aware of it, but I hadn't actually actualized that yet. And that's what you do when you are able to move into memory and knowing and the Akashic Records, because all the information is there, and every person will pick it up in a different way as well. That's why you have all these different channels and teachers saying slightly different things, because everything is unique in the way that it is shown to you, in the way that you see it, and the way that you express it in your language.
Yeah, I heard just recently that one of the main ingredients we need for our ascension is oxygen, and that they know that. And then hence, you know, the mask mandates that are taking place around the world. Would you be able to affirm that or not?
Only in the sense that oxygen is what powers the physical body. So ascension can't take place without the physical body. You can go through into an ascended reality, but if the physical body dies, and it's a different pathway, if the physical body dies, then you are moving through your evolution in a non-physical sense, which isn't ascension. It can still be enlightenment and growth and awareness, but ascension specifically, in the way the Nine teach it, is to take the physical body through this journey. Because normally what's happened since the beginning of time, and in Atlantis and most of the lower density forms of Lemuria, the way to access this memory I'm talking about is to leave the physical body, go back to these non-physical realms, access the Akashic Records, wake up, get all the memory, move that together into a soul, and incarnate again. That's a very basic explanation of it. Ascension is about doing that without leaving the physical body. And so if individuals don't have a good supply of oxygen, that won't go to their organs, and it won't go to their brain, and they won't have enough oxygen to be able to access that memory and work with the crystalline pineal gland. They may have enough oxygen to stay alive, but you need more oxygen flowing through your body to actually power up the crystalline. So yes, that would be true.
Makes me think, was it beneficial then to do some of the specific breathing exercises and stuff like that right now too, to even enhance, like to increase oxygenation in the body?
I would say so, and I would say that that's a tool, and there are many tools available to us. And it's funny you should say that, because my sister's just been starting these breathing exercises. She keeps going on and on about a guy called is it Wim Hof?
Wim Hof. That's actually what was running through my head. That's why I was wondering, because part of their breath is to hyperoxygenate.
Yeah, I haven't studied him or seen him, but my sister, she's been going on and on about him. So yes, this absolutely would be beneficial. This is a tool, just like crystals, just like plant medicines. It's another tool. And when you oxygenate the body, this can assist you in higher awareness and health and regeneration and dealing with trauma and all of the things you need to go through an ascension process. So that would be beneficial. Maybe there may be certain people it wouldn't be beneficial for. For example, I don't know if you had COPD or asthma.
Sure.
I'm not sure whether you'd have to be a little bit careful about how you push your breath. But anyone with, and to be honest, that may be beneficial for them if it was done in a specific way to assist them. I know that certain breathing techniques can actually help asthma, but that would need to be done in a slightly different way. But I think for somebody who has a good oxygenation and good breathing skills, and I would say that's a good tool, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Cool. I know we're taking you here for a long time. I have one question, just because this is an area that you do a lot of work with, and I think is really important right now, is the idea of trauma and the concept of trauma. And I think collectively we're seeing lots of trauma surfacing right at the moment. I know this last while, it's like all of our buttons have been pushed in lots of ways. It's almost like trauma's getting surfacing up for all of us to take a good hard look at. How do we work with it? What's sort of some of the best ways for people to start to navigate that right now? Because it is coming up a lot, and it seems like this is a good time to work with it as it's coming up, because there is so much light coming in right now.
Yes. So for somebody who has buried trauma that they haven't worked on, that is simply just not moving, not coming up to be healed, that person would need to be with a practitioner. It's not something that they would be able to do on their own. They could, but it could send them into a complete psychosis and a scenario that would be frightening, because they would need support to go through that. Somebody with buried trauma would need a facilitator of some kind to assist them. But somebody who's been working on their own with trauma, and trauma is coming up and they're dealing with it and healing it, then for them, I mean, there are a multitude of tools available. You can work with a practitioner, you can work on your own. You can do body movement like yoga, because that's getting trauma out of the muscles. There are many other exercise types that can, if you're moving your body in a certain way. The big three that the 9 talk about are yoga, Tai Chi, and eurythmy. And to a lesser extent, not a lesser extent, in a different way, especially for the male path, certain martial arts, these can actually create energetic flow, and that releases trauma in and of itself, because some people don't necessarily respond very well to talking therapies. They don't want to talk, they're silent. And so talking is traumatic for them in and of itself. So the movement of the body in certain forms of dance would be a better method for those people. And there are multiple ways that you can work with trauma. The way the 9 have taught me is through visualization and through compartmentalizing the aspect of yourself into different cohesive but separate aspects and communicating with them. I think it's similar to, someone told me it was similar to Gestalt therapy, which I'm not familiar with, but someone told me it was a very similar method. So what you would do is you would actually personify the trauma. You'd need to find out what it is first and have some understanding of it. Now, you could work with the trauma even if you don't know what it is, but again, you probably need a facilitator for that, because when the trauma decides to show itself to you and you're not aware of it, you need a facilitator. But if you are aware of what the trauma is, and you are spiritually aware and you've been doing some work already, then you can do this work absolutely on your own. So you would personify the trauma and communicate with it. Give it a form, whichever comes to you. It could be a cute little animal. It could look like a teddy bear. It could just be a color, a form of light. And you can communicate with it and say, why are you here? How long have you been here? Will you remain with me for much longer? Is there anything I need to do to assist you to move on? I accept you, I love you. I mean, you need to love your trauma, and then the trauma will begin to break down because it has a consciousness in and of itself. And if you will, that is what is called a negative entity. A negative entity attachment or an implant is simply a manifestation of trauma. And many people don't understand that. They think that negative entities are something that comes from somewhere else and attaches to you, and you're an innocent bystander, and somebody, some evil person, gave you a negative entity. It can't attach itself to you if it doesn't have a match within you. The match within you is trauma. But when you go deeper into that way of thinking, the negative entity is simply the manifestation of the trauma, which is why personifying the trauma is a good way of working. What the 9 did say is make the trauma small and make the angelic higher guidance aspect large, so that you are not overpowered by the trauma, but you are totally guided and protected, if you will, by the larger. So this is the 5th dimensional landscape of trauma work, which is personifying and characterizing the trauma itself and all the aspects, because trauma may not just be one thing. You might have to have 12 little traumas or 100 little traumas that are all different and talk to them all. So it's a lot of work, and you can write it out, and you can record what you are doing. Some people can do this in one dream. They can wake up from one dream and have worked on a huge trauma. Spiritual healing works in the same way. So someone else is healing you, and they're drawing that trauma out through energetic means. So all you will feel is a surge of emotion as that trauma is coming out. And the emotion that was there in you as the trauma went in is very, very often, but not always, the same emotion when the trauma comes out. The spiritual healing is another way of doing this, but you may not necessarily analyze what's happened. For a crystal individual, spiritual healing is perfect because they're not analytical individuals. For an indigo individual, then working with the personification and communicating with the trauma is a better method because they are analytical. So that's the 5th dimensional landscape. And then the next step up is the 6th dimensional landscape, which takes away the form. The personification is no longer a form, it's geometric. And this is what's in my first book, Masters of the Matrix. And this is seeing your energy field as a matrix, as a geometric structure that works like a computer. And your emotion that you hold feeds a code into that computer, and that computer then generates a match into your reality. And you then work with this structure, and you imagine that it is like a vast library, and you can have little mini computers in it, or books, or you can have little shelves, like when you go into a bank and you ask to look in your security deposit box, you can have all these little security deposit boxes, and you've got the keys, and you find the trauma, and you zoom in on it, and you open the security deposit box. This is a 5th dimensional image when you're doing that, and out comes the trauma, which would present in geometric form. So it would be a shape, a number. It's a presentation of a frequency or a sound. And the teaching for that is in Masters of the Matrix, and it's about allowing your emotion to match the geometric structure and the trauma. So any emotion that would come up for you while you're working with this structure that is what you would perceive as negative, you would then work through that negative emotion and ask yourself questions and work with this field. Allow this computer to sort of show you things. So it's a merge of 5th and 6th dimensional energy, really, rather than just 5th. So 5th is form, 6th dimension is more geometry. And then you would analyze this emotion. You would then move into gratitude for it. It's a very similar journey as personifying the trauma. It's just using geometry as the focus rather than a being, if you will. And then you would give gratitude for the trauma, and then you would work on transmuting it. So this is just one form of teaching that the 9 gave me specifically. And really, that wasn't just trauma per se, but hijacking, programs, contracts that you have made in other lifetimes, contracts people have made for you, the reincarnational hijacking that's taken place, freeing yourself from that, freeing yourself from anything that has caused you not necessarily trauma, but has caused you something that's less than harmonious. And you can work through all of these things. There is another method as well, and that is to do what the 9 call timeline jumping. Now, you would have to have a good understanding of the journey that you went through in your lifetime, because many traumas have come in with you. Some have been hijacked and planted there, if you will, but that's the same thing as you holding it, but it's a different way of perceiving it. But if you're doing timeline jumping for this lifetime, then you would look at all the times in your life when you feel that you've been traumatized, and then go back. So if you remember as a 9-year-old girl crying because you fell out with your friend at school and she did something wrong, but you got the blame for it and you ended up getting detention and it's traumatized you, you go back to that place as you, and you heal and comfort that 9-year-old self, and you put your arms around her and tell her, I'm here and I'm helping you. And that is very useful if you want to move into higher communication and channeling, because when you work with your past self, your future self will then come and work with you, because you create this loop. So that's another way of working with trauma. So there are absolutely a multitude of ways, and there are so many healers that have incarnated with templates for trauma healing. And they've been born with the template, the knowledge from other lifetimes, the downloaded templates from the Akashic Records. And their destiny is to come in and create a template for trauma healing. And these individuals will be healers, and they'll either be working one-to-one with their own methods, or they will have written a book or created some kind of video series or other teaching tool. And then there are hundreds and hundreds of other healers that have incarnated to follow that template. So you've got the healer that creates the template, and then you've got all these people. I mean, the whole journey, the way it's set up is unbelievable, because it's an organic structure of evolution, and it happens organically. What this negative group have done is copied it. That's how they work. They don't have, it's not the organic structure. The organic structure is naturally a positive polarization. It's a unification. Therefore, the positive mirrors the organic structure. What the negative have to do is copy it, which is why they've got all these people working in all these different fields, media and politics and medicine, and writing their books and creating their templates. And like you say, the science, writing it all, because they're creating a false structure that people will think is real. But the real structure happens organically. And you find this real structure today predominantly in the alternative movement, in the spiritual movement, the New Age movement, the alternative movement, alternative medicine. Is it found in the mainstream? Of course it is. And that's the whole beauty of it, because the mainstream individuals that have been following the hijacked negative teaching will come to a point where they wake up and they think, hang on a minute, what I've been teaching for 20 years, this isn't right. And suddenly they turn around and they say, the teaching that I've been teaching for 20 years isn't right. And these people are doing this in 2020, because it's 2020 that has shown them, after all these years of teaching, what's all this about? This isn't what I was taught. This isn't what I've studied for, because the negative groups are quickly trying to deal with everything so fast and keep a lid on all of this evolution. So you now have all these good service to others, positively polarized individuals in the mainstream media. We haven't seen the media yet, but that's going to happen. We're going to have the good people in the media step forward. That's how that structure is taken down. And in medicine and in all of these other movements, 2020 has awoken those people. So when you look at the plan from an organic perspective, it's amazing. And the negative groups believe that they can trump, which is a ironic surname that he has, they can trump the organic structure. That's because the negative path is about becoming a god. But it isn't about becoming a god like Source. It's becoming a power structure god, a god that controls. And that belief is that they can go above the organic. And they can, to a point, when we're in that sort of sine wave that's down here. But when we're up here, they can't do it, because everything's backfiring. And so every single thing they try to do, it flips to the opposite. So 2020 is about stopping this evolution, stopping this great awakening, doing everything they can to prevent it. And that very thing is what's created it. The prophecy has been fulfilled by those who are preventing the prophecy. They are fulfilling the one thing that they aim to stop. And that is the paradox of 2020.
Wow. That's totally like the plan inside a plan inside a plan inside a plan, you know.
That's it.
That's beautiful,
That's
Magenta. What an awesome synopsis. So last thing then, before we finish up, is any insights for 2021 as far as what to sort of expect, what we're moving towards, any insights for people?
Yeah, I mean, right at the beginning of this year, I couldn't see past the end of this year. I'm now able to see the energy up to about the spring. So March 2021, lot of light next year. And I'm not really sure what that light is, other than obviously the awakening and the awareness and the crystalline change. But I'm feeling potentially some kind of cosmic light. And I'm not going to say an event, because that can become misleading. What's happening around the 21st of December 2020 is an event horizon, which is a convergence of potentially multiple events could actually match the frequency of that. And the event horizon is simply a boundary for that structure. So we're making this choice as a collective in 2020, polarizing as negative or positive. And there are those who are polarized positive before they were born that are going to be making a negative choice because they think it's the right one. But moving into 2021, the awareness gets to the point where many who've made the negative choice are realizing that that choice is not in alignment with them, and they are stepping back and needing to come over to the positive pathway, the positive polarization. So that's when the healers step in and help these people that will be traumatized from the negative choice they made, and they will need to deal with that trauma. So that's big in 2021. Lots and lots and lots of healing. And if you want to sort of give that more of a physical name, you'd be looking at post-traumatic stress disorder from individuals who have taken a path and discovered that that path was not the right path for them, if you will, and it's harmed them, and that they were deliberately led there. That will cause a lot of shock. And then there's all of these revelations that are coming up from now right through. So what we've got here is we have at the moment this, if you will, I'm not going to use a negative term to explain this. I'm going to use chess game rather than a different form of opposition. You've got this chess game playing out, which is sort of the positive and negative vying for the predominant presentation. The positive holding that, but the physical reality is playing out. And if you look at the physical reality, it's difficult for many to see that the positive is actually holding that frequency, because it looks like the negative is holding the frequency. As we move beyond the 21st of December 2020 into the next 3 months into the spring, that positive polarity becomes evident ever more. And it's even harder for the negative to take part in this chess game. So you've got revelations coming up, you have lots of healing, lots of people becoming aware, the Great Awakening, evermore. And what we will see, that there are multiple ways this could play out. So it is actually difficult to pinpoint what it is, because the timelines are converged and merged. But what this looks like is multiple plans or agendas being put into place, and all of them backfiring and being exposed, to the point where some of these plans that become exposed are so outside of the understanding of the unaware individuals that they won't even be able to recognize them. So you have even more polarity in that sense, more bifurcation, because you've got individuals that are recognizing this agenda because they already kind of knew about what this was. And then you have other individuals who can't recognize the agenda because it's outside of their reality. So you have things that become invisible to some people and very visible to others. But I also see the first physical presentations of what is being called New Earth. What I mean by that is this positive polarity. The negative agenda is actually trying to prevent this awakening. And one of the things they are doing is restricting people. So there are multiple restrictions throughout the social system and throughout businesses and places you can go. But because of the awareness and the awakening, there are individuals who exist in that system and have existed very well in that system for many, many years, who become aware, and they don't want to enforce their restrictions upon their clientele. So they find a way to make it look like they're enforcing the restrictions, but they're not. And the interesting thing about the first 3 months of 2021, and as I said, I'm really not able to analyze anything beyond March at this point. The interesting thing is these things that are becoming invisible to the unaware includes these businesses that are not following restrictions, because what the individuals will see are, oh, that's a business following the restrictions. They won't be able to see that the restrictions aren't being followed because they won't understand what the businesses are doing and what the people who are going there are doing. They will look and think, why would anyone want to do that? Let's go somewhere else. This is horrible. That's what they will think. But the individuals like us will understand what is happening in these places, and they're all going to be presented in different ways, but it's very kind of, in a way, the nine have said, old-fashioned, basic, not having the shiny bells and whistles of the negative system. It's like, what do you want to go in there for? You know, why would you even want to go there? So it's going to look very uninviting, but it will be absolutely inviting to us. This is the very first seed points to New Earth, because New Earth is a structure outside of this control system. It is in the positive polarity. When you walk into one of these places, whether it's a business or a house or whatever it is, you are moving outside of the third dimension. You are moving into a 5D structure, even though it's the very beginnings of it, but it becomes tangible from the 21st of December 2020 through to around the spring equinox in March. We start to see New Earth, and we start to learn how to find New Earth and how to be part of New Earth. And so many people are planning this now, and they don't even know about New Earth. They don't know about the bifurcation. They don't know about the choices. All they are doing is following their hearts and trying to survive.
Yeah.
And they are part of New Earth. So that's huge in the first 3 months of 2021. And this is another place that all this light comes from. But it's the only thing I see beyond March is a very fast moving, almost like a space type of transportation. And I'm not saying that that's literal. I'm not saying I'm seeing spaceships or you know, people making spaceships. I'm seeing a fast moving spaceship as a metaphor to what is happening, and potentially that could be accelerated ascension, Stargate ascension, being shown in the physical world. So what you're going to see is after March, that is, and this depends on what's happening, and also this could be connected to a positive cyber space. This could be connected to a fast moving area of the internet that becomes quantum. I don't really know, because I haven't really analyzed what I'm seeing there, but what that looks like to me is something where you don't have to, you know, like if you press a button and then 2 minutes later you get a reaction. That's how things kind of go in the linear world. What I'm seeing beyond March, you press a button and instantly the thing happens, and it's like we're going quantum. But I'm not sure what these metaphors mean yet, and I know that the 9 will come through with downloads in real time as we go forward. But I mean, for people like us, next year looks really, really good. You know, from now till March is lovely, beautiful energy. The spring equinox in March is amazing. We've got this amazing energy on the solstice, and more of this community within this positive choice. New Earth is the predominant flavor for 2021.
Oh, I love it. It gets goosebumps. It just feels so exciting. It really is exciting, and it's so wonderful to be able to connect to people like yourself and this community that we're even connecting with through this entire series. Is just, it's so fulfilling right now. It's just wonderful.
It really is.
Yeah.
It really is. And and that's not to negate the suffering that people are going through, because I think it can be difficult to see people in a podcast or an interview smiling and laughing about the wonderful excitement and beautiful euphoria, and think, what are these people on, you know, when the world is falling apart? It's not to negate the suffering. We're aware of the suffering, and we are doing everything we can to guide people into making this positive choice, to help them. But one thing people must remember, and I'm seeing a lot of this, trying to prevent people from making that negative choice. And I understand how much you want to do that, because you know the choice they're making is a huge pitfall. But this is a free will reality, and they have to have the free will to make that negative choice. They have to have the free will to not know the truth. The truth is being exposed, but they have the right to not know it. Yes, they're hijacked and it's not their fault. And we want to save them from the hijacking. We want to save them from the negative group. But they are their own entity. And one of the things that the way showers and the light workers have to learn, and as we go into the next year, is to take a step back and let go. And that's going to be difficult for the light workers, because what that will feel like is we're going into one dimension and we're allowing our loved ones to go into another, and we are becoming something, and we're allowing our loved ones to become something else, and that something else is completely opposing to what we are. And our loved ones, this could actually be our best friends and even our family. Mm-hmm. Having said that, something changes, and all of these individuals, not all, but a great majority of these individuals who've taken this negative choice wake up and see, and that's when they step over and need the healing, and then they come back. So that's kind of how it's looking like it's playing out. And when you see these individuals making these negative choices, what it looks like is that the negative have control, because you're seeing all these people following the negative path, and we are seeing evidence of that now. But energetically, this isn't the case. Energetically, as the negative are desperately trying to hold on to their frequency, because it's the positive that has control. That's why the negative are doing what they're doing. And there comes a point, because the positive structure is an infinite structure, the negative structure is a finite structure, and it's coming to an end. And they're trying to extend it, and they're extending it by using energy and frequency from other souls to power their structure, to act as generators or batteries for their structure, to keep a finite structure going. And it does work for a while. It does work for a while. And what the Nine are saying is, if you imagine these two polarized realities as people, the positive structure is born as a baby and lives forever. It's immortal. The negative structure lives to adolescence. So it does go beyond childhood. It isn't going to collapse immediately. It lives to adolescence, but it never reaches adulthood. It's a finite structure, and it does fall apart. And one other thing that the Nine told me is, when you hear it, this is specific to the UK, but it's something that the whole world can note. I'm not sure why the UK has become significant in these symbols, because I've been told for many, many years that it's the US, and it is the US. Everything is playing out in America. That is the central point. But here in the UK, we've had, I'll speak in code, going back to the houses the first time, where everything's closed and you have to quarantine, if you will. And then we've had going back to the houses and quarantining number 2. That's what we've had, and we're now sort of in partial aspects of the number two quarantine. Yeah. But what's coming after Christmas, after the winter solstice, and potentially in January, and this isn't a 100% definite, but it's a high probability that in the UK there will be a going back to the houses quarantine number 3. Okay, when you hear the term third down of the lock variety, because I don't want your post to be flagged, when you hear those words in the UK, that will coincide with what's happening in the US, which is very different. And what's happening in the US is more of a political play out. These will coincide, and that is when everything begins to fall apart like a domino effect. And this looks to be around March. I mean, this isn't definite, but energetically, it's looking around March. But the seeds to this are starting now. Big spike on the solstice and through into the new year. But because in the new year, there's another, going back to the houses, people are thinking, oh no, the negative have got control. And then all this stuff in America, it's like, no way. You know, the negative have got control. They've got control in America. They've got control in the UK. This is what it will look like. But come March, that's when everything starts to fall apart. But if you hear the term going back to the houses in January in the UK, then that's the start of everything falling apart. So it looks as though January will be when it starts to fall apart, and March is when you really see the evidence of that, which is why New Earth is flourishing. But because this negative group has taken thousands and thousands and thousands of years to set itself up, it can't be dismantled in 2 weeks. It's going to take time. And if you are aware, you will enjoy the journey of this whole shift, because you will be able to experience New Earth now, and the unity that the positive timeline gives you now. It's the unaware that have to wait to experience this. That's why they can't see it, because they don't have the frequency to attract it to them. So it could be a while before they are experiencing what we can experience now, which is again part of this bifurcation. You've got one bunch of people who are happy and smiling, free from fear, enjoying their life, waiting for this big event and getting out the popcorn, and this other group that are just feel that life has fallen apart and something has happened that they never dreamed ever would. So this is the bifurcation that we're in right now, leading up to the winter solstice and the evidence of that afterwards. Nice. So that's kind of what I glean for next year.
Yeah, I think it totally reminds us that we were talking just the other day about the analogy of the seed, you know, and it's like if you're just focusing on the seed that's being planted and it starts to crumble and crack and break apart, and it looks like the entire world is completely falling apart, and then out springs this beautiful new life from it. And I think if we can kind of keep our focus on the new life that's coming out of the seed that's crumbling, there's purpose to all of it. So hang in there, everybody.
That's amazing. Actually, that is such a good metaphor.
Yeah, it helps us kind of paint a nice picture of where we're moving towards. So Magenta, you are wonderful. You're brilliant. We love you so much. And
thank you.
where can we send people to learn more about your work? Because I really encourage people to listen to your channel. Yours was one of the ones that brought so much insight to us when this was all first going out. And like we had said to some of the other people that we had talked to, when all of this went down and we're both sitting there thinking like, what the hell is going on? Like nothing felt right. And then all of a sudden you start to kind of find different people talking about things. You're like, okay, it felt like collecting our family back, you know? And I think it's so important at this time for people to find community like that so that they feel what resonates with them and go with that, listen to it. So where can people find more about you?
Quite a few places now, actually. So my website is www.magentapixie.com, and I'm also on YouTube, Magenta Pixie. Just type in Magenta Pixie, you'll find me on YouTube. But I've just started a page on Telegram, so you can follow me on there. All my updates go on there. I'm also on MeWe as well, which is a nice platform. But I'm still on Bookface. I call it Bookface so that I'm not getting flagged. Everyone says you don't have to code that word, and no, I like calling it Bookface. So I'm still on Bookface. I did have one of my Bookface, I've got more than one Bookface, and I had one taken down, and that had a page linked to it. I had 42,000 followers on there, and they all just went. And it was a shame because I asked questions on there, and that's where I got all my questions for lessons from a living Lemuria. I tried to open another page and the platform wouldn't let me. And then I saw there was a chance of opening a group. Never really wanted a group because I always thought it was so much work, and I was absolutely right, it is. However, they did let me open a group. I now have a group on Bookface, which is called Magenta Pixie and the White Winged Collective Consciousness of Nine. And it's been open a week and a half, and we have 11,000 followers already in a week and a half. If you do want to join, please answer the questions, because there's an automated system that will let you in as a member. If you don't answer the questions and say yes to following the rules, my moderators will not let you in, because obviously we have to be very careful, because Bookface is a hijacked platform. I don't know how long that platform will sustain for. And if that one dematerializes into the ether, then I will start one on MeWe. So if you can't find me on Bookface by the time your podcast is broadcast, you'll find me on MeWe. And the group is supportive. Lots of people, I don't need to step in and respond. Other people are helping one another. And there is a good sense of community. But like all groups, you have the odd sort of disruption. And I don't really like moderating at all and having to delete people and delete posts. But unfortunately, with social media as it is, the ones that are controlled by the negative polarity, we have to kind of do that. I don't see Bookface sustaining through in its current form. And once everything is assimilated within the American situation, then these big technologies will change form. But that's in the future.
Wonderful. We'll make sure that we've got all of your links in the show notes too, so that everybody knows how to get a hold of you. Magenta, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. Well, that was awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to invest in your health and well-being. Since this podcast is brand new, reviews and subscribers are so vital for us to get off the ground and share this really important information. So if you found this information valuable, please post a review and subscribe to the podcast so you'll get our newest episodes. Also, if you know of someone who would benefit from this, please share it with them. You can also find us on Instagram at #InspireHealthPodcast. If you have a question that you'd like to be addressed, direct message me on Instagram or leave a comment on one of my posts. I would love to hear from you. And you can grab our show notes and free resources for each episode at inspirehealthpodcast.com. So be sure to go online and check it out.